Hi guys, tonight we begin a calm journey into the life of Timur, a man whose quiet ambition shaped empires and whose dreams stretched far beyond the deserts he rode across. In the next moments, we'll slowly enter the world of a warrior who believed he could design the perfect order, a place where strength, loyalty and destiny all met under his hand. This is a story of power told softly, a tale of a man who built an empire by imagining it first in silence. But before we begin, for those who enjoy slow, thoughtful stories about legendary figures, hit like, subscribe and share in the comments which personality or historical figure you'd like me to cover next. And tell me, where are you watching from? I'm always curious to see the different places my viewers are from. In the stillness of the Central Asian steppe, long before Timur became a name whispered across continents, he was simply a boy born into a small Barlas clan near the city of Kesh, not far from modern-day Samarkand. His early world felt wide and endless, shaped by open skies, shifting winds, and the slow rhythm of horses moving across the plains. Despite the simplicity of this beginning, those who knew him spoke of a quiet intensity behind his eyes, a sense that he watched the world not just as it was, but as it might become. He grew up surrounded by stories of Genghis Khan, legends carried through generations, tales of impossible conquests and perfect unity, forged under a single ruler. These stories did not fill Timur with dreams of chaos, but instead with a strange, calm fascination. He imagined not destruction, but design. A vision where every city, every road, every decision had its place in a great structure only he seemed able to see. Even as a child, he studied the way leaders spoke, how elders settled disputes, how travellers moved from one region to another. Nothing dramatic, nothing rushed, just a boy absorbing the patterns of a world he quietly planned to rearrange. The steppe shaped him in ways soft but permanent. The cold nights taught patience, the long rides taught endurance, and the endless distances trained his mind to dream in grand scales. But more than anything, Timur learned early that strength alone was not enough. Leaders rose and fell depending on their understanding of people, their hopes, their fears, their loyalty. He spent hours listening rather than speaking, observing the little details others ignored. With every quiet observation, a blueprint formed in his mind, though he did not yet know how fully it would define his life. As he grew older, the region around him began shifting. Tribes fought for influence, alliances changed like sand patterns under a restless wind, and rising tensions created a world where cleverness mattered as much as courage. Timur did not rush into these conflicts. Instead, he moved through them with a calm awareness, studying how power flowed from one leader to another, how a single choice could change the direction of an entire clan. The world felt unstable, but to Timur, instability was simply a puzzle waiting for the right hands to arrange its pieces. Even before he lifted a sword, he understood something essential. An empire was not built on force alone, but on the quiet ability to see structure where others saw disorder. This understanding settled in him the way night settles over the plains, slowly, steadily, with a promise that the future would one day bend to the shape of his vision. Here, in this peaceful beginning, Timur's dream of a perfect empire took its first silent breath. From the quiet edges of his youth, Timur stepped slowly into a world where every decision carried weight and every alliance shaped the land around him. By the time he reached early adulthood, the region surrounding Samarkand was tangled in rivalries between small tribes and broken remnants of once powerful states. Nothing was stable, nothing permanent, exactly the kind of landscape that revealed where true leadership could rise. Timur watched these shifting tensions with calm patience. He understood that the strongest warriors rushed into battles, but the most enduring leaders entered only when the moment aligned perfectly. Instead of trying to force a path, he learned to sense opportunity the way a shepherd senses weather changes on the horizon. Quietly, instinctively, long before anyone else noticed the shift. During these years, Timur built relationships not through loud declarations, but through simple, steady presence. He offered help where it mattered, solved disputes without seeking credit, and earned loyalty through reliability rather than promises. People began to trust him before they fully understood why. There was something in his composed manner, something reassuring in his ability to remain steady when others were swept up in emotional fear. But the land itself was restless. Larger powers from the west and east tried to influence the region, hoping to control trade routes or place their chosen leaders in command. Clans that once lived peacefully began to argue over borders, resources, and honor. Tensions rose slowly, like water gathering behind a weakening dam. Timur observed all of it with a sense of quiet purpose. He did not yet have an army, nor did he seek one. Instead, he studied how each tribe functioned, how their loyalties formed, and what values brought them closer together or tore them apart. He realized that every leader wanted stability, yet few truly knew how to build it. They acted for immediate gain, unable to see the long arc of future consequences. Timur saw these patterns clearly, and in them he recognized his own path taking shape. It was not enough to imagine a perfect empire. He would need to build one with patience, step by step, beginning with understanding the people who might one day follow him. Even in these early movements, before any dramatic victories or legendary campaigns, Timur's influence began to stretch quietly across the plains. People spoke his name with respect, not for conquest, but for clarity and steadiness. He was becoming a figure others naturally looked toward, especially in moments when the world felt uncertain. And as these subtle shifts settled into place, the foundation of a future empire began forming beneath his feet, not through force, but through the gentle gravity of a man who understood order in a way few others could see. As the political landscape around Transoxiana continued to fracture, Timur moved through it with the same quiet steadiness that had defined his early years. By this time, he'd grown into a young man respected for his calm reasoning and his ability to read situations long before they unfolded. While many leaders relied on strength or intimidation, Timur leaned on something softer, but far more effective, an understanding of human nature. He recognized that people followed those who could offer certainty, even when the world felt unstable. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, he began to provide that certainty. Though he had not yet stepped into the full life of a warrior, Timur's reputation spread across nearby settlements. He was known as someone who resolved conflicts without escalating them, someone who could sit with angry rivals and guide them into quiet agreement. This talent made him valuable, and it also allowed him to observe leadership in its rawest form. He learned who acted out of fear, who acted out of pride, and who acted because they believed they had no choice. These observations shaped the foundation of his future leadership style, a style built not on loud commands but on subtle pressure and precise timing. Yet the steppe was changing in ways that would soon require him to choose a sharper path. Raids between clans became more frequent, trade caravans were threatened, and the delicate balance between neighbouring territories grew increasingly fragile. It was during one particularly tense season that Timur realised words alone would not shape the future. If he wanted to stabilise the region, if he wanted to guide it toward the order he imagined, he would need the strength to defend his vision. And so, quietly and without ceremony, he began forming alliances with young warriors who admired his insight. They were not many at first, just a handful of riders who shared his desire for unity and purpose. Timur did not promise them riches or glory. Instead, he offered something rarer, a place in a future shaped by intention rather than chaos. To these men, his vision felt steady and clear. While other leaders rushed toward battle to prove their worth, Timur chose each movement carefully. He trained alongside his followers, learning the weight of the sword and the rhythm of the bow with a discipline that surprised even seasoned fighters. He never acted as though he were above them, and this humility created a loyalty that would eventually become unbreakable. The turning point arrived quietly, as most significant shifts in his life did. A nearby clan fell into conflict over leadership, splitting into two factions that threatened to tear the region apart. Timur and his small band rode to observe, intending only to understand the situation. But when he saw innocent families caught between the rival groups, something inside him settled firmly. It became clear that without decisive leadership, disorder would consume the land he hoped to organize. In a moment that would later seem inevitable, Timur stepped forward to mediate the conflict. He spoke calmly, outlining terms that protected both honor and stability. When one side attempted to break these agreements through force, Timur's group defended the innocent with precision, ending the skirmish before it expanded. This was not yet conquest, but it was the first time Timur's actions shaped the region directly through both diplomacy and strength. Word of the event spread across the plains, not as a tale of battle, but as a story of a young leader who combined wisdom with courage in a way that felt rare and reassuring. It was here, in these early choices, that Timur's path began to deepen, a journey no longer defined only by observation, but by the first gentle steps of a man preparing to mould an empire from the shifting sands around him. In the months that followed his first decisive intervention, Timur's presence in the region grew steadily, not through sudden victories or bold claims, but through the soft accumulation of trust. People observed how he handled conflict, how he approached problems with a level mind, and how he chose solutions that protected more lives than they endangered. In a land where leaders often acted out of impulse, Timur's calm deliberation felt unusual, almost comforting. Even elders began to consult him, asking for his perspective on matters that once lay far beyond the concerns of a young warrior. Timur, however, never rushed to accept influence. He preferred to listen, to learn, and to understand the underlying tensions that shaped the lives around him. The more he understood, the more clearly he saw how fragile the region had become. Villages survived from season to season, but the larger structure connecting them continued to crumble. Trade routes shifted unpredictably, alliances dissolved overnight, and power changed hands too often for meaningful progress to take root. Timur sensed that his dream of a perfect empire could never grow on soil that unstable. Something stronger had to be built first. As he deepened his knowledge of the surrounding territories, he also strengthened the bonds within his small band of warriors. They were a diverse group, some from his own Barlas clan, others from neighbouring tribes. But each had found in Timur a kind of steady centre. He treated them not as followers, but as partners, and this respect created a unity rare among young fighters. They trained together daily, mastering coordinated movements and quiet signalling, learning to move as a single, thoughtful unit rather than a scattered force. It was during one of these training seasons that Timur's leadership faced a new, more personal test. When a neighbouring chief sought aid against a band of raiders, Timur agreed to assist, not for reward, but because protecting the region's stability aligned with his deeper purpose. His group moved quickly toward the affected valley, expecting a small confrontation. But on the way they encountered evidence of a larger threat: burned fields, displaced families, and the lingering signs of a force far more organized than simple raiders. Timur approached the situation with caution. Instead of rushing into the valley, he spent hours observing the terrain, studying distances, listening to survivors. Through their stories, he pieced together a clearer picture. The raiders belonged to a group seeking to gain influence by exploiting weak borders. If left unchecked, they would disrupt not just the valley, but large portions of the trade network Timur wished to stabilize. The realization settled over him like a quiet turning point. He could no longer act only when asked. He would need to anticipate threats before they grew. His group moved at dawn, approaching the raiders' camp with deliberate precision. The confrontation was swift but controlled. Timur positioned his riders in a way that cut off escape routes without cornering the enemy into desperate violence. When the battle ended, it was Timur who ensured that surviving villagers were guided to safety and that supplies were redistributed to prevent further suffering. What struck the people most was not his tactical skill, though it was impressive, but the calm with which he moved from one decision to the next, as though he had rehearsed this moment in his mind long before it arrived. Stories of this action travelled farther than Timur expected. They were not tales of brutality or dominance, but of a young warrior who brought order where chaos threatened to take hold. This image of him spread quietly across the plains, adding weight to his name and drawing more curious riders who wished to join his disciplined circle. With each new ally, Timur sensed that his path was widening. He was no longer observing the shape of the world. He was beginning gently but unmistakably to redefine it. As Timur's circle of warriors slowly expanded, so too did the quiet recognition of his growing influence. Villagers who once knew him only as a thoughtful young man from the Barlas clan now spoke of him as someone capable of restoring stability to a land long pulled apart by shifting loyalties. Yet even as admiration spread, Timur kept his focus on understanding the deeper currents shaping the region. He believed that true leadership required clarity, and clarity came only from patient observation. During this period, Timur spent more time travelling between settlements, not to display power, but to listen. Each village offered a different story about the challenges they faced: weakened trade links, disputes over grazing lands, unpredictable raids, and the constant uncertainty of who held authority from one season to the next. These stories did not discourage him. Instead, they helped him see the region as a complex tapestry whose threads needed careful realignment. His growing group of riders accompanied him on these quiet journeys. They learned to move efficiently, to avoid unnecessary conflict, and to treat local communities with respect. This approach distinguished them from other warrior bands who often entered villages with demands rather than cooperation. Timur's men brought assistance, protection, and reassurance, and because of this, people welcomed them rather than feared their presence. It was on one of these journeys that Timur encountered a situation that further shaped his developing philosophy. A drought had struck a cluster of settlements near the Zarafshan Valley, leaving families struggling to survive. Instead of raiding one another, as was common during hard times, the villages had formed uneasy alliances, sharing water and grazing land in ways that surprised even their elders. Timur studied their arrangement carefully. He realized that necessity had pushed them to create a kind of order without a central authority, an order built on cooperation rather than force. This deeply resonated with him. It strengthened his belief that an empire did not need to rule through fear. It could thrive through stability, fairness, and a sense of shared purpose. Inspired by what he observed, Timur helped these settlements create more lasting agreements, guiding discussions with his calm, steady voice. He helped them map out grazing cycles, organize shared water access, and establish a simple system of mutual protection. None of these plans were dramatic. They were quiet, practical solutions, but they carried the first hints of the larger structure Timur would one day build across entire continents. While he worked with the villagers, word reached him of a new disturbance in the region. A powerful tribal leader to the north was attempting to expand his influence, pressuring smaller clans to submit to his authority. Many resisted, fearing a loss of independence, but without unity, their resistance would crumble. Timur understood this immediately. If the northern leader succeeded, the fragile balance he had been nurturing could collapse. He gathered his warriors and set out to observe the situation firsthand. Timur did not intend to rush into confrontation. He wanted to understand the intentions behind the northern leader's actions and whether negotiation was possible. But as he approached the contested region, it became clear that the leader's expansion was driven not by a desire for stability, but by ambition alone. Villages were being threatened, borders were being drawn without respect for long-standing agreements, and smaller clans were left with little chance to protect themselves. Timur remained outwardly calm, but inside he felt a quiet certainty forming. If he wished to guide the region toward the ordered future he imagined, he could no longer stay on the margins. The moment was approaching when he would need to step forward fully, not just as an advisor or mediator, but as a leader whose vision could shield the land from the growing storms around it. Timur's arrival in the troubled northern region marked a quiet but meaningful shift in his journey. Until this point, he had acted mostly as an advisor, a stabilizing presence who stepped in only when conflict threatened the fragile balance of the land. But as he and his riders approached villages overshadowed by the northern leader's growing ambition, Timur sensed that the time for cautious observation was slowly fading. The people here greeted him with a mixture of hope and exhaustion. Many had already lost grazing lands or been pressured into unfair agreements. Others feared that open resistance would bring retaliation they could not withstand. Timur listened to their concerns with the patient calm that had long defined him, studying not only their words but the quiet details of their daily lives. The guarded looks, the thin herds, the way families stayed close together as though bracing for something unseen. What struck him most was how deeply the people longed not for domination or revenge, but for a return to dependable rhythms, predictable borders, fair exchanges, and safety for their children. These simple desires reinforced Timur's conviction that stability, not conquest, must lie at the heart of any future he built. Determined to understand the situation fully, Timur visited several outlying settlements, moving carefully to avoid unnecessary attention. Everywhere he went, he found evidence of pressure. New outposts built too close to grazing paths, emissaries demanding tribute, and scouts observing villages from a distance. It was a slow tightening of control, the kind that left communities feeling cornered long before any battles were actually fought. Timur knew this strategy well. It was effective, subtle, and difficult to resist without strong leadership. And yet, he also recognized something else. The northern leader's influence relied heavily on intimidation rather than loyalty. If challenged with precision, his hold on the region might weaken quickly, but Timur did not act impulsively. Instead, he spent several days studying the terrain, the positions of the new outposts, and the movements of the northern forces. His riders gathered information quietly, speaking with traders and shepherds, learning which clans still resisted and which had already been forced to yield. Piece by piece, a clearer picture emerged. The northern leader was overextending himself. His push for control was too fast, his forces spread too thin, his alliances shallow. Timur understood that this kind of overreach often collapsed under its own weight, but only if someone gave the right nudge at the right moment. Before deciding on any course, Timur met with elders from several threatened clans. He spoke with his usual softness, suggesting that unity, rather than scattered defiance, offered their best chance at preserving independence. The elders listened closely, surprised that Timur sought cooperation before conflict. In a region used to leaders who imposed their will, his approach felt unexpectedly respectful. Slowly, an agreement began to take shape. If Timur could provide guidance and coordinated defense, the clans would stand together. It was not yet a grand alliance, nor a declaration of war. It was something quieter, the first collective breath of people choosing to trust his calm vision, and in that moment, Timur sensed the direction of his life settling into place. He was no longer simply responding to disorder. He was preparing to shape the land itself, gently guiding it toward the ordered future he had long imagined. With the northern clans slowly uniting under his guidance, Timur began to sense how delicate yet powerful true cooperation could be. It was not built through fear or force, but through quiet reassurance. The steady feeling that someone was finally seeing the region as a whole rather than as separate competing territories. As Timur travelled between the allied settlements, he noticed a gradual shift in the way people looked at him. Where once they saw a thoughtful young warrior, they now recognized someone capable of giving direction when no one else could. And still, he carried no crown, issued no demands, and made no promises he could not keep. Instead, he listened, observed, and acted only when necessary. This calm approach made the clans feel safer than any display of power could have. Timur's next step was to understand the northern leader himself. Rather than viewing him as an enemy, Timur approached the situation as a problem of structure. What motivated this leader? What weaknesses shaped his decisions? What patterns defined his rise? To answer these questions, Timur sent trusted riders to gather information discreetly. They returned with details about the leader's tactics. He imposed heavy tributes on villages yet failed to provide protection. He rewarded loyalty inconsistently. He relied on intimidation more than genuine alliances, and his commanders often acted independently, creating confusion in his ranks. This told Timur something important. An authority built on fear alone had cracks beneath its surface. If pressed carefully, those cracks could widen until the entire structure faltered. Yet Timur did not rush. Instead, he began strengthening communication among the clans supporting him. He encouraged them to establish safe paths between settlements, share resources when needed, and coordinate scouts to watch for sudden movements from the north. None of this seemed dramatic, but slowly, the region began to feel less vulnerable. People sensed that they were no longer isolated. One evening, as Timur rested with his riders near a small river, an elder from a nearby settlement approached him. The elder spoke openly, explaining that the clans needed not just protection, but direction, someone who understood the land deeply enough to guide them through uncertainty. Timur listened quietly, offering no grand declarations, but inside he felt something shift. The people were not simply looking for a defender. They were searching for a leader whose vision could stretch beyond the immediate troubles of the moment. Soon after, news reached Timur that the northern leader planned to enforce a stronger claim on the area by establishing permanent garrisons. This would tighten his grip and make resistance far more difficult. Timur knew the moment for observation was ending. For the first time, he began to consider a coordinated response, not to conquer, but to prevent instability from spreading. His riders gathered around him as he outlined the steps ahead. There was no anger in his voice, no dramatic call to arms, only a calm certainty that the region needed guidance, and that he must now move from advising to actively shaping events. In the quiet that followed, Timur understood that he was crossing an invisible threshold. What lay ahead would define not just the clans, but the future shape of his dream, a future where order grew from intention, not fear. As dawn spread across the plains, Timur prepared his riders for a movement that would mark a new phase in his quiet rise. Until now, he had responded to threats with patience, avoiding direct confrontation whenever diplomacy or observation could resolve a situation. But with the northern leader planning to fortify his control through permanent garrisons, Timur understood that the balance of the region was on the verge of tipping in a way that would cause long-lasting instability. Before taking any step, Timur met privately with the elders of the supporting clans. They travelled in small groups to avoid drawing attention, gathering in a secluded valley where the wind softened their voices. Timur spoke with calm clarity, explaining that the moment required unity not out of ambition, but out of necessity. If the northern forces settled permanently, every settlement in the region would lose the freedom to manage its own land and future. The elders listened closely, realizing that resistance alone would not be enough. They needed coordination, purpose, and someone who saw the broader landscape with the precision required to guide them. Timur did not ask for titles or authority. He simply outlined a plan to protect their lands, restrict the northern leader's expansion, support threatened villages, and prevent panic from spreading. The clans agreed, not because Timur demanded it, but because his vision felt steady and grounded in understanding rather than aggression. Over the following days, Timur and his riders studied the northern movement patterns with careful attention. They discovered that the leader's forces relied heavily on a few key routes for supplies, moving through narrow passes and river crossings to maintain their presence in the area. These routes, though essential, were vulnerable. Timur saw an opportunity, not for destruction, but for disruption. If these paths were monitored and occasionally obstructed, the northern forces would struggle to establish new garrisons. The goal was not to win battles, but to prevent them from gaining the foothold they needed. With quiet efficiency, Timur coordinated small groups from the allied clans to guard these strategic points. They were instructed not to provoke fights, but to slow the enemy's progress through controlled presence and negotiation. Many northern units, already stretched thin, chose to retreat rather than risk confrontation with a united local force. The northern leader, frustrated by these setbacks, responded by sending larger groups, but this only increased the strain on his own resources. Timur observed these reactions carefully, noting each decision and its effects. He realized that the northern leader's ambition was running ahead of his capacity to sustain it. This imbalance created pressure that could be used to weaken his influence further. Meanwhile, Timur's own alliances grew stronger. Families from different clans who once kept their distance now shared meals, exchanged supplies, and offered shelter to one another. The people began to feel that the land was no longer divided into small, uncertain pockets, but was slowly becoming a connected region with shared purpose. One evening, as Timur rested at the edge of a small encampment, he watched the distant glow of campfires from villages that now considered themselves part of a larger whole. This quiet unity reaffirmed his belief that order could grow naturally when people were given guidance without domination. And though he knew greater challenges lay ahead, Timur felt a calm resolve settling within him. He had stepped into a role that demanded not only strength, but vision that would continue to shape the land long after these early struggles faded into memory. As the weeks unfolded, Timur watched the shifting situation in the north with the same steady patience that had guided every step of his rise. The northern leader's attempts to plant permanent garrisons had slowed, stalled by the unexpected unity of the clans and the quiet, deliberate coordination Timur had put into place. Yet Timur understood that this pause did not mean safety. Pressure, once applied, rarely vanished on its own. It waited, gathered strength, and sought new paths. Timur knew he had to stay ahead of it. He began travelling between the allied settlements again, but this time his purpose was different. Instead of gathering information, he focused on strengthening the foundations of trust that held the region together. In each village, he met with elders, young riders, and families, not as a distant strategist, but as a calm presence who truly listened. This simple act reassured people more deeply than any announcement could have. They felt seen, understood, and included in the quiet shaping of their future. During one such visit, Timur spoke with a young shepherd who described seeing northern scouts near the foothills. The shepherd wasn't frightened. He was concerned for his neighbours. This detail struck Timur. For the first time, ordinary villagers were beginning to think beyond their immediate needs, considering the safety of other communities as intertwined with their own. This was the early root of something Timur valued deeply: shared identity. With this in mind, Timur adjusted his strategy. Rather than focusing solely on the northern routes, he encouraged the clans to create a network of simple signals: fires on hilltops, fabric markers near riverbeds, and coordinated riding paths to alert one another quickly if danger appeared. These methods were not sophisticated, but they worked flawlessly across the open terrain. The northern leader, unaware of the growing communication system, continued to misinterpret the region's unity as coincidence. This misunderstanding weakened his strategy further. Meanwhile, Timur's riders continued to observe quietly, noting each shift in the northern forces. They reported rising tension among the leader's commanders, many of whom questioned the wisdom of stretching their influence so far. This internal strain became another piece in the larger pattern Timur was patiently assembling. One evening, as a cold wind swept across the plains, Timur stood on a ridge overlooking a cluster of villages now working together more smoothly than ever before. Fires glowed softly below, scattered like constellations across the valley. He realized that much of what he had hoped to build, cooperation, structure, balance, was already forming even before any formal leadership was declared. But Timur also understood that unity built in a moment of shared danger had to be strengthened if it was to endure. The northern leader might retreat temporarily, but ambition rarely faded quietly. A greater confrontation would come eventually, shaped by forces far beyond the foothills of this region. And when it did, the people would need more than temporary alliances. They would need stability that could withstand years, not just seasons. Timur inhaled the cold night air and felt a growing certainty settle within him, a sense that the path he had followed so naturally was leading him toward a responsibility far larger than the disputes of the moment. The land was changing, slowly but unmistakably, and he was changing with it. As unity continued to take quiet root across the region, Timur's focus shifted from defense to preparation. He understood that this calm period was not an end but a pause, a chance to strengthen what had been built before the northern leader regrouped or new rivals emerged. Stability required deeper foundations, ones that could endure long after the immediate threats faded. With this in mind, Timur began working closely with the younger warriors from each clan. He saw in them the future shape of the region, determined, eager, and more open to shared purpose than the older generations who carried long memories of disputes. Timur taught them not only how to ride, fight, and scout efficiently, but also how to observe without judgment, how to make decisions from a place of clarity rather than reaction. His lessons were simple and calm, and this calmness settled into the young men like a steady heartbeat. As they trained together, they also learned to trust one another, creating bonds that would prove essential in the years to come. During this same time, Timur devoted attention to understanding the land on a deeper level. He rode across riverbeds, through narrow passes, and along trade routes that had supported the region for generations. With each journey, he mapped the terrain not only in his mind but in his intuition. He noted where herds gathered during certain seasons, where water sources remained steady during droughts, and which paths caravans preferred when carrying goods east or west. These observations were not merely practical, they shaped his broader vision. Timur began to see how an organized system of routes, guarded crossings, and cooperative settlements could stabilize the region far more effectively than force alone. It was a vision of order growing naturally from the land rather than imposed upon it. At the same time, reports from the north described increasing tension within the rival leader's camp. Commanders disagreed over strategy, arguing about resources and questioning the point of expanding into a region that now resisted with calm coordination instead of scattered fear. Timur listened carefully to each report, understanding that internal divisions weakened a force more effectively than any direct confrontation. Yet he did not celebrate these cracks. He knew well that a leader under pressure could become unpredictable, acting out of frustration rather than calculation. Such unpredictability could spill across borders in ways that threatened even the most prepared communities. One evening, as he sat with his riders beside a low-burning fire, Timur received word that scouts had seen unfamiliar banners approaching from the distant northwest. These were not northern forces. They belonged to a different tribe entirely, one with its own ambitions and unresolved conflicts. The plains were shifting again, drawing new influences into the delicate balance Timur had tried to protect. Instead of reacting with alarm, Timur studied the information carefully. He knew that the arrival of a new group could destabilize the region, if not approached thoughtfully. But he also sensed an opportunity. New alliances, if shaped carefully, could strengthen the unity that had begun forming among the clans. Timur decided to meet with representatives of this approaching tribe, not with swords raised, but with the same calm openness that had built trust elsewhere. He prepared his riders for the journey, emphasizing caution, observation, and respect. As they set out at dawn, the air carried a quiet sense of anticipation. Timur felt the path widening beneath him once again. The region was changing, gathering new currents of influence, and he was stepping toward a future that demanded both strength and clarity. And though he could not yet see the full shape of what awaited him, he sensed that each step was leading him closer to the empire he had long envisioned in silence. As Timur and his riders travelled toward the northwest, the air carried a faint chill that hinted at early seasonal change. The land stretched wide and quiet, its vastness giving Timur time to think. He understood that the arrival of a new tribe could shift local power in unpredictable ways. Yet he also sensed that these newcomers might be searching for stability, just as the northern clans had been. If approached with care, this meeting could strengthen the fragile unity he had been cultivating. When Timur reached the outskirts of the tribe's temporary encampment, he instructed his riders to remain calm and visible, making no sudden movements that might provoke alarm. The tribe responded in kind, sending a small delegation to greet them. The atmosphere was watchful but not hostile. Timur felt a familiar rhythm in these first cautious moments, the quiet negotiation of intentions, the subtle testing of boundaries. Timur was invited into a large tent where he met the tribe's spokesman, a measured older man who spoke with steady authority. Their first exchange was simple, focused on travel, weather, and the state of the grazing lands. Only after mutual respect was established did they begin discussing deeper matters. The newcomers described pressure from conflicts further west and explained that they sought temporary passage and trade opportunities rather than confrontation. Timur listened carefully, sensing that they were weary of instability and receptive to balanced agreements. Instead of imposing terms, he proposed a mutual understanding. The tribe would travel through designated routes, maintain peaceful conduct, and avoid interfering with local settlements. In return, Timur's unified clans would provide safe passage and allow controlled trade along their journey. The spokesman considered these terms thoughtfully before agreeing. A quiet sense of relief settled over the tent. Both sides recognized that a potentially dangerous situation had been transformed into cooperation. Over the next few days, Timur oversaw the tribe's movement through the region. His riders guided them along safe paths, avoiding areas where tensions with the northern leader remained high. Villagers who initially feared the sight of unfamiliar banners grew more at ease as they witnessed the newcomers behaving respectfully. This experience reinforced something Timur already believed, that clear expectations and calm leadership could turn uncertainty into order. Still, he never let himself become complacent. He monitored every development carefully, knowing that the stability he worked to create could unravel quickly if vigilance slipped. When the tribe finally moved beyond the region, Timur and his riders returned to the heart of the unified lands. He noticed subtle but meaningful changes. People greeted warriors from other clans with more familiarity, shared resources more freely, and spoke of their future with growing confidence. The unity Timur had once hoped for was no longer an abstract idea. It was becoming a reality, shaped by calm choices and small, steady steps. Yet even as this sense of stability deepened, Timur felt a quiet awareness stirring within him. Regional unity was only the beginning. Larger forces beyond the horizon would soon influence the land, bringing challenges that demanded greater strength and a broader vision. And although he never rushed toward ambition, Timur sensed that the time was approaching when he would need to step even further into the role that destiny was quietly preparing for him. Returning from the northwest, Timur sensed that the land had entered a fragile but hopeful stage. The clans were more connected than ever. The new tribe had passed peacefully, and the northern leader's influence continued to weaken under the weight of his own overreach. Yet Timur felt no urge to celebrate. Stability, he knew, required constant attention, especially now, when external pressures could slip in through even the smallest cracks. As he rode through the settlements, Timur observed details that many overlooked. Children played near shared wells between clans that once avoided each other. Villagers from distant areas exchanged goods without fear of disputes. Evening gatherings had grown more common, with people sharing stories, music, and quiet conversations. These simple scenes reassured Timur that unity had taken root on its own, not through force, but through trust. But alongside these hopeful signs, Timur noticed something else. The people had begun to look to him instinctively whenever uncertainty arose. It was not a burden he had asked for, but a responsibility he felt forming naturally, shaped by the choices he had made. He knew leadership was less about titles and more about steady presence, and that presence was now expected of him. One evening, while Timur rested near a settlement on the edge of the northern frontier, scouts arrived with new information. The northern leader, frustrated by months of resistance, had begun gathering a larger force. He intended to reclaim influence swiftly, hoping to intimidate the clans back into submission. Timur listened without emotion. He had anticipated this. Ambition weakened by setbacks often surged again before it faded for good. Rather than reacting with urgency, Timur spent the next morning studying maps drawn from memory and observation. He marked river bends, narrow passes, open fields, and the high ridges that overlooked critical routes. These natural formations were more valuable than any fortress. They shaped movement and strategy, often deciding outcomes before battles even began. His riders gathered around him as he outlined a simple plan: avoid direct confrontation unless absolutely necessary, guide the clans to defensible positions, and use the terrain to discourage the enemy's advance. Timur emphasized calm, reminding them that fear spread faster than any opposing army. The northern forces, now moving south, advanced with visible determination. But as they reached the areas Timur had anticipated, they found paths subtly blocked, scouts trailing their movement, and local clans quietly united rather than scattered. Every attempt to establish control was met with organized, measured resistance. The enemy commander, expecting disarray, grew uncertain. His forces hesitated. Some questioned why the region seemed prepared for every movement. Timur watched from a distance, understanding that doubt was often more powerful than force. After several days of stalled progress, the northern leader realized he could not secure the region without heavy losses he could not afford. Slowly, almost reluctantly, he withdrew his forces. No major battle took place, no grand victory was declared, yet the region remained intact, held together not by war but by quiet coordination. When the danger passed, Timur stood on a ridge overlooking the plains, feeling a deepening awareness settle within him. The unity he had nurtured had proven strong, resilient, capable of withstanding pressure. But this success also revealed something larger. The land needed more than a temporary guide. It needed lasting structure, principles, order, and a vision that could stretch farther than the horizon. Timur knew he was being pulled toward a path he could no longer ignore. With the northern threat finally receding, Timur felt the land exhale in a way he had not sensed before. Villages that once braced for uncertainty now moved through their days with a quieter rhythm, no longer scanning the horizon for sudden disruption. Yet Timur understood that peace gained without deeper structure could fade as quickly as it appeared. He began travelling once more between the clans, not to address immediate danger, but to plant the early seeds of something more lasting. In each settlement, he listened to concerns about harvests, grazing, trade, and security. He realized that although the clans were unified in spirit, their ways of managing daily life still differed widely. If lasting order were to take hold, these differences needed coordination, not through control but through shared standards. With this in mind, Timur encouraged the clans to establish simple, region-wide agreements: fair trade weights, consistent grazing boundaries, and mutual protection pacts that clarified responsibilities during times of trouble. None of these changes were dramatic, but each acted as a thread pulling the region into a more stable whole. One evening, as Timur camped near the foothills, a group of young warriors approached him. They spoke respectfully but directly, explaining that many people across the land now saw Timur as their natural leader. His calm decision-making, fairness, and vision had earned their trust. Timur listened quietly. He had never declared himself a leader, never claimed authority. His influence had grown through action rather than words. Still, he could feel the truth in what they were saying. The people needed a central guiding force, someone to maintain the fragile balance that had begun forming. Over the next days, Timur reflected deeply. He rode alone at times, letting his thoughts settle with the movement of his horse. He understood that stepping fully into leadership would change everything. It meant responsibility for not just clans, but for shaping the future of the entire region. And yet, he felt no fear. Instead, there was a calm recognition that this path had been forming long before he acknowledged it. When Timur returned to the main settlement, the elders gathered, sensing a shift. Timur addressed them simply. He did not ask for titles or allegiance. Instead, he offered a vision, a unified land guided by fairness, stability, and shared purpose, where strength served order rather than chaos. The elders, already trusting his judgment, agreed without hesitation. In that moment, Timur crossed an invisible threshold. He was no longer the quiet observer shaping events from the edges. He had stepped into leadership, steady, deliberate, and ready to guide the region toward the larger dream that had lived quietly within him for years. Once the elders acknowledged Timur's vision, a quiet transformation moved through the region. There was no ceremony, no dramatic announcement, just an unspoken understanding spreading from one settlement to another that a new kind of guidance now shaped their collective future. People continued their routines, but with a new sense of direction, as though an invisible thread connected their daily choices to something larger. Timur approached this new role with the same calm steadiness that had defined every step of his rise. Instead of imposing strict changes, he focused first on reinforcing the unity that had formed naturally. He encouraged the clans to maintain their communication networks, strengthen shared patrols along trade routes, and continue meeting regularly to resolve disputes before they grew. This consistency, simple as it seemed, reassured people more than any display of authority could. Still, Timur knew that leadership required understanding the land on every level. He travelled constantly, visiting the smallest villages and the busiest crossroads, learning the daily realities of farmers, herders, traders, and craftsmen. These conversations revealed subtle problems, uneven access to water, disputes over caravan fees, tensions between seasonal migrants and permanent settlers. None of these issues were large enough to threaten the region outright, but together they formed the fine cracks that could weaken unity if ignored. Timur addressed each concern with patient clarity. He organised agreements between villages to share irrigation channels, adjusted trade guidelines to reduce disputes, and encouraged mutual aid between clans when harvests fell short. His decisions were careful and deliberate, always designed to strengthen cooperation rather than favour one group over another, and the people noticed. They saw that Timur's guidance was not about power, it was about balance. During this time, Timur also began shaping a council of trusted advisors. These were not chosen for wealth or lineage, but for insight, fairness, and loyalty to stability. Some were older, with decades of experience. Others were younger warriors who had proven themselves thoughtful under pressure. Together they formed a circle that helped Timur understand the region's needs from multiple perspectives. Yet even with these new structures forming, Timur sensed a larger truth on the horizon. Unity within the region was only the foundation. Beyond its borders lay lands fragmented by rivalries, weakened empires, and shifting ambitions. These external forces would eventually touch his world, whether invited or not. One evening, as Timur stood overlooking the plains, he watched distant fires flicker from neighbouring territories. The glow reminded him that his vision could not stop at creating local stability. To protect what he had built, and to shape the perfect order he imagined, he would eventually need to engage with the wider world. But for now, Timur focused on strengthening the roots of his emerging realm. A strong foundation would be essential for everything that followed, and though he sensed the coming challenges, he faced them with the same quiet certainty that had guided him from the beginning. As weeks turned into months, Timur's growing realm settled into a steady rhythm. The clans, once wary of one another, now shared responsibilities with surprising ease. Patrols rotated smoothly along the trade routes. Disputes were resolved through calm discussion rather than force, and villages began planning harvests and migrations with consideration for neighbouring lands. This harmony felt new, almost fragile, yet deeply promising. Timur continued travelling across the region, observing every shift in mood and structure. He believed leadership required constant awareness, not distant command. In each settlement he noticed small but meaningful signs of progress: repaired irrigation channels, shared grazing patterns, and caravans moving without fear of sudden raids. These details confirmed what he already sensed. The land was beginning to breathe in unison. Still, Timur understood that order could not rely solely on cooperation. It required systems that could endure beyond individual relationships. With this in mind, he encouraged the development of simple administrative practices, written agreements for trade, standardized measures for goods, and consistent expectations for caravan safety. These measures, though modest, quietly strengthened the region's stability. People no longer depended on guesswork or tradition alone. They now had shared guidelines that reduced conflict before it could grow. During one journey along a major trade route, Timur encountered a group of merchants preparing to travel east. They spoke of distant cities where chaos had begun to spread. Places once strong, now weakened by internal disputes and shifting alliances. Listening to their stories, Timur felt a subtle stirring within him. These distant lands, though far away, were part of a larger world that would eventually influence his own. If instability grew beyond his borders, it could threaten everything he had worked to build. This realization stayed with him even after the merchants departed. That evening, as he camped beneath a quiet sky, Timur reflected on the path ahead. His realm was stable, but stability alone could not shield it from external pressures. To protect the unity he had nurtured, he would eventually need to look outward, to understand the political currents of neighbouring territories, anticipate threats, and forge alliances that extended beyond familiar planes. Yet he felt no rush. Every step he had taken so far had emerged naturally, guided by observation rather than force. He believed the next steps would reveal themselves just as clearly when the time was right. For now, Timur focused on deepening the strength within his borders. He expanded the Council of Advisors, bringing in representatives from newly settled clans. He encouraged young warriors to train not just for combat, but for communication, negotiation, and planning. He reminded elders of the importance of unity, especially in seasons when resources grew thin. The land responded to this guidance with quiet resilience. Trade increased, borders felt secure, and the people began to speak of their future with confidence rather than caution. And though Timur sensed larger challenges forming beyond the horizon, he also knew that the foundations he was building, fairness, order, cooperation, would prepare his realm for whatever the future demanded. The path ahead was widening, but he walked it with calm certainty, knowing each step carried him closer to the greater vision that had lived within him since youth. As Timur's influence spread quietly across the region, he began noticing how people's expectations shifted as well. Where once they sought only protection or guidance in troubled moments, they now looked to him for structure, predictability, and a sense of shared destiny. This change did not surprise Timur. Stability naturally encouraged deeper hopes, and his calm leadership had shown the clans that order was possible even in uncertain times. Still, Timur knew that maintaining unity would become increasingly challenging as the realm grew. Different clans held different customs, and although they cooperated well under pressure, peace often revealed old tensions. To prevent small disagreements from escalating, Timur encouraged regular gatherings between clan leaders. These meetings focused not on hierarchy, but on conversation, each voice heard, each concern acknowledged. Over time, these gatherings became a quiet cornerstone of the region's harmony. One morning, Timur travelled to a settlement known for its skilled metal workers. He wanted to understand their craft, not for wealth, but for its importance in building reliable tools, weapons, and agricultural equipment. The craftsman explained how their work depended on steady trade routes and equal access to resources, both of which had improved under Timur's guidance. Their gratitude was sincere, but Timur focused instead on details: the supply chains they relied on, the challenges they faced in acquiring certain materials, the conflicts that sometimes arose when merchants passed through rival territories. These conversations revealed subtle weaknesses that could threaten the region's progress if ignored. Timur responded by strengthening protections along minor trade paths, negotiating fair tolls at key crossings, and encouraging clans to share responsibility for maintaining roads and bridges. These adjustments were small yet significant. They reduced friction between traders and clans, and they helped goods move more freely, boosting prosperity throughout the land. During another journey, Timur visited a cluster of shepherd families in the highlands. There, he observed how shifting weather patterns affected grazing routes, sometimes creating unintended conflicts with farmers in nearby valleys. Instead of issuing rigid rules, Timur worked with both groups to design flexible agreements based on seasonal conditions. This thoughtful approach prevented disputes while respecting the land's natural rhythms. As he travelled, Timur also saw something else emerging, stories spreading about him, quietly at first, then with growing consistency. People spoke of his fairness, his patience, his ability to understand situations before they fully unfolded. These stories travelled faster than his riders, shaping perceptions in places he had not yet visited. Timur never sought praise, but he recognised the power of reputation. A leader trusted by the people could achieve unity through cooperation rather than fear. Yet even as his realms strengthened internally, Timur felt a steady awareness of the world beyond his borders. Traders brought news of distant cities unsettled by rivalry, of powerful leaders losing control, of armies shifting like storms between weakened kingdoms. These distant events were more than stories. They were signals. The world was changing, and its turbulence would eventually brush against his growing realm. One evening, as Timur watched the sun fade over the plains, he understood that the unity he nurtured had given him something rare, a strong foundation from which to act when larger challenges arrived. He felt no urgency, only a calm acceptance that the next stage of his journey would reach far beyond settling disputes or guiding trade. A broader horizon awaited him, one he felt prepared to meet with the same patience, clarity, and quiet resolve that had shaped every step of his rise so far. As Timur's realm continued to grow in strength and coherence, he spent more time studying not only his own lands, but the vast territories beyond them. Trade caravans brought stories from distant cities, tales of weakening rulers, shifting alliances, and conflicts that left entire regions without clear leadership. Timur listened to these accounts with quiet focus. He understood that instability in faraway places could ripple outward, eventually touching the borders of his own unified clans. One afternoon, Timur met with a group of merchants who had returned from a major city to the south. They described a place once prosperous, now divided between competing factions. Markets that had thrived for generations were now controlled by rival groups. Caravans were forced to pay overlapping tolls, and ordinary citizens lived with uncertainty. As Timur absorbed their descriptions, he saw familiar patterns: power without structure, ambition without vision, authority without fairness. These were the very conditions that had once threatened his homeland before unity took root. He sensed that the world beyond his borders was entering a period of great change, one that could either end in chaos or open new pathways for leadership. Timur did not speak of this openly, but the awareness settled inside him like a long, quiet breath. Still, he remained committed to strengthening the foundation at home. He continued expanding the Council of Advisors, adding individuals with different skills, strategists, scholars, craftsmen, and even seasoned travellers who understood the customs of distant regions. This diversity of insight helped Timur anticipate challenges that might otherwise remain invisible. During this same period, he focused on deepening the bonds between the clans. He organised gatherings that celebrated shared heritage through music, storytelling, and seasonal rituals. These events helped bridge old divides, allowing people to see one another not as separate groups, but as contributors to a larger whole. The unity formed through celebration proved just as important as agreements formed through discussion. While travelling through a valley known for its fertile fields, Timur observed another subtle but meaningful change. Young warriors from different clans now trained together without hesitation. They moved as a single unit, sharing techniques, correcting one another with respect, and growing stronger through cooperation. This sight reassured Timur. He knew that the long-term strength of his realm depended on a generation raised with unity as a natural state, not a temporary alliance. Even with these positive developments, Timur remained aware of the delicate balance he maintained. Though the northern leader had retreated, Timur's scouts reported signs that the rival was attempting to build alliances elsewhere. Ambition rarely vanished. It simply sought new angles. Timur took this calmly, knowing that his steady growth at home would be his strongest defense against external threats. At night, as he rode beneath the constellations that had guided him since youth, Timur reflected on the silent transformation unfolding across the land. The realm he had shaped through patience and intention was no longer merely surviving, it was stabilizing, strengthening, preparing, and though the world beyond his borders churned with uncertainty, Timur felt ready to face whatever changes approached. His confidence did not come from ambition, but from the quiet certainty that order, once rooted deeply, could endure even the strongest winds. As Timur continued to guide his realm with calm determination, the signs of his influence became more visible across the land. Roads that once felt unsafe now bustled with merchants. Fields that had suffered from disorganization now thrived under clearer agreements, and villages that once feared their neighbors now worked together towards shared goals. Yet even as prosperity gradually expanded, Timur remained attentive to the finer details, the small cracks that could, if ignored, grow into larger fractures over time. On one of his journeys, Timur visited a settlement known for weaving fine textiles. The weavers explained that trade had improved, but that competition between certain families remained tense. Rather than issuing commands, Timur invited both families to a simple gathering. He listened as each explained their concerns, pricing disputes, difficulties in sharing dye resources, and misunderstandings about delivery routes. With quiet patience, he guided them to a compromise, reminding them that cooperation increased their overall success. By the end of the meeting, the tension had eased, replaced by cautious understanding. This encounter reinforced something Timur already believed. Order was not built through grand gestures, but through countless small moments where fairness replaced conflict. Meanwhile, scouts brought news of neighboring regions growing more unstable. Leaders struggled to maintain unity, and rival factions fought over dwindling resources. Timur understood that such conditions could easily spill across borders. He strengthened patrols in vulnerable areas and reinforced alliances with clans that lived near the edges of his realm. His actions were neither aggressive nor fearful, only careful, like a craftsman reinforcing the foundation of a structure before expanding it. During a gathering of elders, Timur introduced the idea of coordinated seasonal planning. Instead of each clan acting independently, he proposed shared calendars for planting, migration, and trade caravans. The idea was met with thoughtful interest. Such organization promised increased prosperity and fewer conflicts, as everyone would move according to predictable rhythms. Gradually the elders agreed, recognizing the long-term value of unified timing. Over time, these coordinated efforts produced noticeable results. Harvests became more reliable, clan migrations less disruptive, and trading seasons more profitable. People began to understand that unity was not merely an emergency necessity, it was a practical advantage. One evening, after a long day of travel, Timur stood on a hill overlooking several villages glowing softly under the twilight. He felt a deep sense of quiet pride, not in himself, but in the people who had embraced cooperation so willingly. The realm he had shaped was no longer fragile. It was growing stronger with each passing season. Yet Timur also sensed that this strength would soon be tested. The wider world was shifting, and forces beyond his borders were moving in ways that could not be ignored. As he watched the horizon fade into the dark, Timur knew that the next stage of his journey would require more than guidance. It would require stepping beyond the land he had stabilized and facing the challenges that waited in the vast and uncertain territories beyond. As the seasons turned, Timur sensed a subtle but unmistakable change in the air. His realm had grown steadier, richer, and more confident, yet this stability brought new responsibilities. When order takes root, people begin to expect not just safety, but direction, a sense of where their collective future might lead. Timur understood this deeply. With unity established, he could no longer focus solely on preserving balance. He had to think ahead, beyond the familiar plains and valleys, to the larger world that influenced the fate of every settlement under his guidance. During one council gathering, traders described growing unrest in a major city far to the west. What had once been a strong centre of commerce was now weakening under rival factions. Merchants were harassed, caravans delayed, and once reliable rulers struggled to maintain control. Timur listened quietly, asking precise questions about the city's leadership, alliances, and strategic importance. Each answer clarified something he had long suspected. Instability outside his borders would eventually threaten stability within them. After the meeting, Timur rode alone along a quiet ridge. He considered the history of the steppe, how power shifted from one leader to another, how regions rose or fell depending on their ability to adapt. He realized that if he wanted his realm to endure, it could not remain isolated. The world was interconnected, its changes spreading like wind across grasslands. Strength at home would not be enough forever. Soon after, Timur began assessing the readiness of his warriors. They had trained for years in unity, discipline, and coordinated movement. They were prepared to defend their land, but Timur sensed they needed something more, a wider understanding of strategy, diplomacy, and the shifting forces beyond their borders. He gathered his commanders and spoke with calm clarity. He explained that the time had come to observe the world more closely, not through rumours or scattered reports, but with deliberate presence. Scouts were dispatched to neighbouring regions with clear instructions: avoid conflict, gather knowledge, and understand the political currents shaping distant lands. Meanwhile, Timur continued to strengthen the internal bonds of his realm. He organised new training routines that combined practical skill with strategic thinking, encouraging young warriors to understand not just how to fight, but why and when. He reminded them that leadership involves seeing beyond immediate threats, recognising patterns, predicting change, and preparing for futures unseen. As weeks passed, reports from the scouts returned. They described territories on the brink of fragmentation, leaders struggling to maintain authority, and borders shifting unpredictably. Timur absorbed every detail. What others saw as chaos, he recognised as opportunity, not for conquest born of ambition, but for expansion guided by order. He understood that the vision that had shaped his homeland could extend outward, bringing stability to lands long troubled by disunity. One evening, standing beneath a sky scattered with stars, Timur felt a quiet certainty settle within him. His realm was strong enough to stand, strong enough to grow, and strong enough to influence a wider world. The time was approaching for him to step beyond local leadership and towards something larger, not through force alone, but through the steady, deliberate extension of the order he had built. The path ahead was vast, but Timur felt prepared. His quiet rise had laid the groundwork for a new chapter, one that would reach far beyond the plains that had shaped him. The more Timur learned about the shifting world beyond his borders, the more clearly he understood that change was not simply approaching, it was already unfolding. Reports from his scouts revealed territories fractured by disputes, cities unable to protect vital trade routes, and rulers struggling to hold together what remained of their power. To Timur, these descriptions did not inspire fear. They revealed a landscape waiting for structure, clarity, and leadership. Still, he moved with patience. Before reaching outward, he wanted to ensure his realm remained steady. He expanded training among the clans, encouraging cooperation between warriors who had never fought side by side before unity took hold. They learned to anticipate each other's movements, share responsibility without hesitation, and protect one another as naturally as members of a single tribe. This harmony created a quiet confidence throughout the land. people sensed that something greater was forming, not through loud declarations, but through the calm efficiency of everyday life. Crops were planted on shared schedules, caravans moved without fear, and disputes were settled before they grew. Timur watched these developments with a steady satisfaction. The foundation was strong. It was time to think bigger. During one gathering of his council, Timur spoke of the distant cities described by merchants and scouts. He outlined their weaknesses and the ways in which instability could ripple outward, threatening trade and safety. His advisors listened closely. They knew Timur never spoke of expansion lightly. When he finished, the council did not ask whether action was necessary. They asked how to proceed. Timur's answer was simple: observe first, act with intention, and bring order only where it could take root. Within days, he assembled a group of trusted commanders to travel with him to the edges of the neighbouring regions. Their mission was not conquest, but understanding, seeing the land firsthand, speaking with local leaders, and identifying where cooperation could be built. As they journeyed, Timur noticed signs of decay in abandoned outposts and neglected roads. Villagers in certain areas lived without protection, unsure which authority to trust. Others had formed small alliances out of necessity, but lacked the larger structure needed to maintain long-term stability. Timur approached these communities with the same calm presence that had shaped his own realm. He listened to their challenges, observed their dynamics, and offered guidance without imposing demands. His reputation, carried ahead by merchants and travellers, made these encounters easier. Many already believed he was a leader committed to fairness and order. During one meeting with a group of village elders near a crumbling trade corridor, Timur saw how deeply they longed for stability. Their voices carried fatigue, but also hope. They wanted safety, consistency, and a leader who would not abandon them when pressure rose. Timur did not promise immediate solutions, but he assured them that the realm he guided valued cooperation, not domination. When he left, the elders exchanged glances filled with cautious optimism. As Timur and his commanders continued their journey, he felt something he had sensed before, a growing alignment between his internal vision and the world's unfolding needs. The land beyond his borders was not resisting change, it was inviting it. Quietly, steadily, Timur recognized that the time was nearing when he would extend his influence outward, not to conquer blindly, but to shape a larger order that could withstand the rising waves of instability. The world was opening, and Timur prepared to meet it with the same patience and clarity that had guided him from the beginning. As Timur and his commanders continued their slow, deliberate journey along the outer edges of neighbouring territories, he felt the world widening in a way he had long expected. Villages that once served as quiet stops for traders now stood half abandoned, their residents uncertain where to turn for guidance. Roads that should have connected distant regions were worn, unguarded, and slowly disappearing under drifting soil. Each sign confirmed what Timur already knew. These lands were waiting for order, waiting for someone to weave them back into structure. Yet Timur did not rush. He believed that meaningful change required understanding, and understanding required patience. In one settlement, he spoke with farmers who explained that rival groups often demanded taxes but never offered protection. In another, a former official described how internal disputes had driven their leaders into isolation, leaving communities to fend for themselves. Timur listened closely, absorbing each detail until a clear picture formed. These territories were not resisting unity. They had simply forgotten what stability felt like. One evening, Timur's group set camp near a crossroads once known for its vibrant market. Now, the stall stood empty. Timur walked slowly among the abandoned structures, noticing small remnants of daily life. Pieces of fabric, old pottery shards, faded markings on wooden posts. He imagined the noise and colour that once filled the space, and he felt a steady conviction settling deeper within him. The world needed restoration, not domination. As he returned to camp, one of his commanders approached, asking whether the time had come to extend their rule. Timur considered the question carefully before answering. He explained that expansion without purpose would only repeat the failures of other leaders. To bring true order, they needed to act where they were welcomed, where people desired stability more than independence. The next days brought encounters that confirmed this approach. In several settlements, elders openly asked Timur for advice, recognizing in him the qualities they longed for: fairness, discipline, and a vision beyond personal gain. They did not fear him. They trusted him. This trust, Timur understood, was more powerful than any army. As his group prepared to return home, Timur paused at the top of a ridge overlooking the distant horizon. The land stretched endlessly before him, filled with both uncertainty and potential. He felt a calm certainty rise within him. His realm had grown strong enough to stand on its own, but the world beyond now called for a broader kind of leadership, one shaped by intention, clarity, and an unwavering commitment to order. Timur mounted his horse, knowing that the journey ahead would no longer focus solely on protecting what he had built. It would now involve shaping the wider world, step by step, with the same quiet resolve that had guided him from the beginning. When Timur and his commanders returned to their homeland, the clans welcomed them with a sense of pride and anticipation. They could tell from Timur's quiet confidence that something had shifted, not in the land itself, but in the direction of their future. The realm he had shaped was no longer simply surviving storms. It was preparing to face the wider world with intention. Timur spent the first days after his return listening to reports from across the region. Trade remained steady, alliances strong, and cooperation between clans continued to deepen. Yet he also noticed subtle hints of restlessness. Young warriors trained with sharper focus, craftsmen asked about opportunities beyond the familiar borders, and merchants spoke openly about renewing old trade routes that had fallen into disrepair. The people were beginning to feel the pull of expansion, even if they could not name it. During a council meeting, Timur shared the observations he had gathered during his travels. He described lands in disarray, cities longing for structure, and communities ready to welcome someone who could guide them toward order. His advisors listened with growing understanding. They realized that the stability Timur had created was not meant to remain confined. It was a foundation, one strong enough to support something far larger. Still, Timur urged patience. He explained that expansion must not come from conquest alone, but from purpose, bringing stability to places where chaos had become the norm. The council agreed, trusting Timur's sense of timing as they always had. In the weeks that followed, Timur strengthened the region's internal structure to prepare for future steps. He improved communication between distant clans, refined training among the warriors, and encouraged settlements to stock supplies not just for themselves but for potential long journeys. Every action was small on its own, but together they formed a strategic rhythm, a quiet preparation for what was to come. One evening, while riding along a familiar ridge, Timur looked across the plains and imagined the broader world that awaited him. He felt no rush, only a calm awareness that the next stage of his life would require both strength and wisdom. His dream of creating a perfectly ordered empire was no longer a distant idea. It was beginning to take form in the movements of his people, in the stories spreading across neighbouring lands, and in the steady, widening influence of his leadership. As the wind swept gently across the steppe, Timur understood that the time for observing was ending. The moment for shaping the world beyond his borders was drawing closer, and he was ready to meet it with the same quiet resolve that had guided every decision until now. As preparations quietly unfolded across the realm, Timur sensed that the people had begun to internalize something deeper than unity. They were no longer simply following his guidance. They were aligning themselves with a shared purpose, a collective momentum that reached farther than their familiar planes. This shift filled the land with a subtle energy, calm but unmistakable, like the first steady breath before a long journey. Timur moved through the settlements, observing how naturally cooperation had become part of daily life. In one village, he watched farmers help repair a neighbour's irrigation channel before tending to their own fields. In another, young warriors from different clans practiced formations with a smooth coordination that had once seemed impossible. These small acts reflected a profound truth. The realm had outgrown its old boundaries, both physical and mental. During a large gathering of elders and clan leaders, Timur spoke with thoughtful clarity. He described the instability in neighbouring territories and the need to ensure that disorder did not spill into their homeland. But he also explained that their realm was now strong enough to extend guidance outward, not through domination, but through structure and fairness. The leaders listened carefully. They understood that the world beyond their borders was changing, and that ignoring these changes would be more dangerous than facing them with intention. While some expressed concerns about stretching resources too thin, Timur addressed each point calmly, reminding them that expansion guided by strategy rather than haste would strengthen, not weaken, their stability. After the gathering, Timur walked alone along a quiet stream. He reflected on how far they had come, from scattered clans barely surviving shifting alliances to a unified region ready to influence distant lands. He remembered the early days when he had travelled alone, listening to villagers describe their fears. Now, those same people stood confidently behind him, trusting his vision because they had seen the results of his patience and clarity. As days passed, Timur began forming a small group of emissaries trained in diplomacy, observation, and negotiation. Their role would be to engage with neighbouring territories, understand their needs, and identify areas where cooperation or integration could grow naturally. This approach reflected Timur's belief that true expansion relied on willingness, not force. Meanwhile, warriors continued their training, sharpening both discipline and restraint. Timur insisted that they prepare not just for conflict, but for the responsibilities that came with representing a realm built on order. One evening, standing atop a hill overlooking a valley lit by scattered fires, Timur felt a deep certainty settle within him. His dream of shaping a perfectly ordered empire was no longer theoretical. It was becoming inevitable. The people were ready, the land was stable, and the wider world was calling for leadership strong enough to restore what others had allowed to crumble. Timur mounted his horse slowly, knowing that the next step would mark the beginning of a new chapter, one that would carry his influence far beyond the borders he had once known. As Timur's realm prepared for its next great movement, he focused on ensuring that every part of the land, every clan, every village, every trade route, was aligned in purpose. He understood that a unified direction could only endure if built on strong internal trust. Without it, even the greatest dreams dissolved under pressure. In the following weeks, Timur travelled to the outermost settlements, visiting remote highland communities and river villages seldom reached by major caravans. He listened as locals described their daily routines, their concerns about seasonal shifts, and their hopes for the future. Though their challenges varied, Timur found a common thread. Each community sought stability, fairness, and a leader who did not overlook them. Timur reassured them with the same calm, steady presence that had guided the region for years. He emphasized that their voices mattered and that their needs would be considered in every major decision. This attention fostered deep loyalty. People who once felt disconnected now saw themselves as integral pieces of a larger whole. Meanwhile, emissaries, carefully selected for their patience, awareness and clarity, departed for neighbouring territories. Their mission was simple yet crucial: build bridges where possible, offer support where needed, and observe where caution was required. Timur valued knowledge as highly as strength, understanding that insight into distant politics would shape the strategies of the future. Reports soon returned describing areas untouched by stable leadership. Some towns clung to remnants of authority, while others drifted between rival factions. The emissaries spoke of leaders who desired alliances but feared betrayal, and of communities that longed for unity but lacked a guiding hand. These accounts confirmed what Timur had sensed. The world was not resisting structure, it was calling for it. Back home, Timur continued shaping the foundation for what was to come. He refined the communication network between clans, improved the reliability of supply routes, and ensured that each settlement maintained reserves for long journeys and unexpected challenges. He reinforced the principle that strength must always serve order, never ambition alone. One day, as Timur overlooked a wide valley shimmering under the afternoon sun, he reflected on the transformation unfolding around him. The land that once struggled with constant uncertainty now moved with quiet harmony. Warriors stood ready not out of fear, but out of devotion. Families planned their futures with confidence. The realm Timur shaped was no longer merely a cluster of united clans. It was the beginning of something greater, something with the potential to reshape the world. As twilight settled, Timur felt a familiar calm settle within him. He knew the moment was approaching when he would lead his people beyond their borders to bring order where chaos reigned. And he would do so not driven by conquest, but by the steady vision that had guided him from the earliest days, a world shaped by intention, fairness, and enduring structure. As the realm continued settling into its newfound strength, Timur gathered his commanders for a series of thoughtful discussions. He wanted them to understand not only the direction ahead, but the principles guiding every decision. They met in calm, open spaces, sometimes under the shade of a lone tree, sometimes beside rivers whose steady flow mirrored Timur's own patience. There was no urgency in his tone, only clarity. He explained that expansion must always be anchored in purpose. A leader who sought territory for its own sake invited disorder, but a leader who sought to bring stability where it lacked could reshape the world with intention. His commanders listened with deep respect, noting how Timur's guidance consistently blended vision with practicality. In the following days, emissaries returned with more detailed reports from distant regions. They described cities divided by internal rivalries, small kingdoms unsure whom to trust, and rulers whose authority faded under pressure. The message was consistent. Leadership had weakened across vast stretches of land, leaving space for someone capable of restoring balance. Timur studied these reports carefully. He did not rush to interpret them as invitations, but he recognized their implications. The world was preparing for change, and his realm was one of the few places building toward unity rather than breaking apart. Back among his people, Timur observed how naturally they adapted to the idea of engaging with the outside world. Young warriors trained with greater purpose, elders discussed trade opportunities beyond familiar routes, and families spoke with cautious optimism about the possibilities that lay ahead. Their confidence did not stem from ambition, but from trust. Trust in Timur's judgment, his fairness, and his ability to see further than anyone else. One afternoon, Timur visited a riverside settlement known for its boat craftsmen. He watched as they shaped sturdy vessels using traditional techniques refined over generations. The craftsmen explained that increased trade had renewed their work, bringing them both pride and responsibility. Timur encouraged them to continue perfecting their craft, knowing that rivers connected more than just nearby villages. They linked distant lands, carrying influence as naturally as they carried goods. Later that evening, he met with shepherds in the highlands who had recently adjusted their seasonal routes to support cooperation between clans. Their willingness to adapt demonstrated something Timur valued deeply: unity rooted not in force but in understanding. As he rode back from the highlands, the horizon stretched before him in a soft golden glow. He reflected on the patterns unfolding across his realm: healthier trade, improved communication, strengthened bonds, and a shared sense of purpose. These changes were not accidental. They were the early signs of a structure ready to expand beyond its original borders. Timur felt a calm certainty rise within him. The journey towards shaping a greater world had already begun, not through conquest, but through the steady preparation of minds and lands. Soon, the moment would come when he and his people would step forward, carrying with them the order they had forged together. Observing the quiet harmony below, Timur understood. The realm was ready, and so was he. As Timur's realm moved closer to the threshold of expansion, he knew it was essential to deepen the sense of unity that had become the backbone of their progress. The people trusted him, but true stability required that they also trust one another, even as the realm prepared to stretch beyond familiar borders. Timur dedicated the next weeks to strengthening this internal cohesion. He organised gatherings where representatives from different clans shared stories, traditions and lessons from their past. These gatherings brought together elders, warriors, craftsmen and merchants who rarely met outside of necessity. Through shared meals and conversations, they began to understand how much they truly had in common. These connections, Timur believed, would prevent future misunderstandings once their world grew larger. At the same time, he focused on refining the realm's communication network. Messengers rode between settlements carrying updates about trade, weather, and troop movements. These simple routines created a predictable flow of information, ensuring that no clan felt isolated. Timur knew that clarity dispelled fear, and fear was often the greatest threat to unity. Meanwhile, his emissaries continued sending reports from beyond the borders. They described regions fractured by disputes, struggling under leaders who lacked vision. One city spoke openly of requesting Timur's guidance, while another territory seemed on the brink of collapse. The world beyond was unstable, yet full of potential, like fertile soil waiting for a steady hand. Timur absorbed each detail with thoughtful focus. He understood that bringing these lands into order could not be rushed. The people needed to see his realm as a model of stability, not an imposing force, and so he emphasized preparation over haste. Warriors trained not just for battle, but for discipline, restraint, and the responsibility of representing a higher standard. Young leaders were taught diplomacy alongside strategy. Caravans were instructed on how to navigate new trade routes with respect for local customs. Timur's approach was both cautious and deliberate, like a craftsman shaping a foundation with each precise movement. One evening, as he observed a group of young warriors practicing coordinated formations, Timur felt a quiet pride. They moved with confidence born from unity, their steps aligned, their focus unwavering. They were not merely fighters, they were the future bearers of his vision. Later, while standing atop a gently sloping hill, Timur watched the distant lights of scattered villages flicker against the horizon. The land seemed to pulse with possibility. His realm had grown from fragile cooperation to quiet strength, and now it stood ready to shape the world beyond. He felt no haste, only a steady certainty. The time for expansion was approaching, carried not by ambition alone, but by a responsibility that had taken root within him since his youth. In the calm night air, Timur understood that his dream of a perfectly ordered empire was no longer distant. It was beginning to reveal its outline, waiting for the next deliberate step. As Timur prepared his realm for the next chapter, he understood that the true test of unity was not how people acted in moments of ease, but how they responded when faced with uncertainty. To ensure his people were ready, he spent time reinforcing the core principles that had shaped their transformation: discipline, fairness, and shared purpose. These values, he believed, would guide them far more effectively than any set of rigid laws. He began by strengthening the bonds between clans through cooperative projects. In one valley, he encouraged several settlements to work together on restoring an old irrigation system. In another, he oversaw the construction of a fortified outpost designed to protect key trade routes. These shared efforts created a sense of mutual achievement, reminding everyone that their progress was intertwined. Meanwhile, Timur expanded the circle of individuals he trusted with sensitive information. Young leaders from various clans were brought into strategic discussions, learning not only the realm's strengths but its vulnerabilities. Timur believed that transparency cultivated responsibility. These emerging leaders, guided by his calm presence, developed a clearer understanding of what it meant to protect the fragile balance they had worked so hard to build. Reports from emissaries continued to flow in, revealing both danger and opportunity. Some territories were collapsing under rival leaders, their people exhausted by constant instability. Others quietly expressed interest in forming alliances, drawn by Timur's growing reputation. He studied these developments not as separate events, but as pieces of a larger map, a map that hinted at the future shape of his expanding world. One evening, Timur rode to a quiet overlook where he often reflected on the realm's direction. From this vantage point he could see the lights of multiple settlements scattered across the plains. Each cluster of flickering lamps symbolized a community that now felt safer, stronger, and more connected through his guidance. The sight filled him with both pride and responsibility. He knew his people were ready to support a broader mission, yet he also recognized that expansion required patience and precision. Before taking any bold steps, he wanted to ensure that his realm could stand firmly even if the world around them shifted. As he descended from the overlook, Timur felt the steady pull of destiny. His dream of a perfectly ordered empire had always been larger than his homeland, but now, for the first time, the conditions aligned. His people were prepared, his influence respected, and the surrounding world in desperate need of structure. The path toward expansion lay before him, clear, wide, and shaped by years of quiet preparation. All that remained was the moment to step forward. As the momentum of Timur's realm grew, subtle shifts began to ripple through the region. Villages spoke with newfound confidence, traders planned longer routes, and young warriors carried themselves with a sense of disciplined pride. Timur observed these changes with quiet satisfaction. They were not the result of force, but the natural outcome of shared purpose. His people were no longer simply adapting to stability. They were embracing it as a way of life. Wanting to ensure that this unity remained strong, Timur spent time meeting with individuals from all levels of society. He walked through bustling markets, listening to merchants discuss their hopes for expanded trade. He sat with farmers in open fields, discussing irrigation, harvest cycles, and their concerns about unpredictable seasons. He spoke with elders who once doubted any form of cooperation, only to now admit that unity had brought peace they had never thought possible. Each conversation reinforced Timur's conviction that the realm was ready for something greater. At the same time, his emissaries continued returning with valuable insights from distant lands. They described territories where leaders were losing credibility, leaving their people unsure where to turn. They told of border towns caught between rival claimants, and of regions once prosperous now struggling to maintain order. These reports painted a clear picture. The world was searching for stability, and few possessed the ability to provide it. Timur understood that if his realm were to step forward, it had to do so with intention, not impulse. He gathered his commanders and advisors for a series of measured discussions, focusing on each region individually. They considered the needs, risks, and potential of every territory mentioned by the emissaries. Timur emphasized that expansion must support stability above all else. They were not to impose themselves upon lands that resisted, but instead engage with regions that sought guidance or relief from chaos. During this period of careful planning, Timur travelled to a high overlook where he could see the faint outlines of distant territories. The edges of the horizon seemed to blur into possibility. As he stood there, a soft wind brushed across the plains, carrying distant scents and sounds. It reminded him of his youth, the days when he quietly studied the world, imagining how order could be restored where it had crumbled. Now, years later, that vision was no longer an imagined future. It was forming step by step, shaped by deliberate choices and patient strategy. As Timur rode back to camp, he felt a steady confidence settle within him. His realm had matured, his people had grown resilient and united. The world beyond his borders was calling for a leader who could bring structure, purpose, and clarity. The moment to extend his influence was nearing, not out of ambition alone, but out of a responsibility that had quietly guided him his entire life. The responsibility to bring order where none remained. As the realm continued preparing for the steps that lay beyond its borders, Timur sensed a growing awareness among his people. They understood that their unity was no longer just a shield. It was becoming a foundation strong enough to support greater ambitions. Villagers discussed distant regions with curiosity rather than fear, warriors trained with disciplined confidence, and merchants spoke eagerly of routes that once seemed too dangerous to attempt. Timur knew these changes were the result of years of patient guidance. Now, he needed to make sure the realm could carry its stability outward without losing the harmony that defined it. He began spending quiet evenings with his commanders, reviewing maps and assessing the strengths of each clan. They discussed how different groups could support one another during long journeys, how supply chains could be maintained across unfamiliar terrain, and how diplomacy would remain as important as military readiness. Timur emphasized that every movement beyond their borders must reflect the values that shape their unity: fairness, clarity, and purpose. He reminded them that the world beyond was unstable, precisely because leaders had neglected those principles. His realm would not repeat their mistakes. At the same time, emissaries brought new information from distant cities. Some regions showed clear willingness to collaborate with Timur, weary of the constant conflict that plagued their governance. Others were torn between rival leaders, their people seeking someone capable of stabilizing their fractured lands. The reports confirmed what Timur already felt. The world was shifting, and many places were ready for a guiding hand. Still, Timur did not allow excitement to overshadow caution. He travelled once more through his own realm, observing its rhythm with thoughtful attention. He watched shepherds guiding their flocks along shared routes, families preparing for seasonal shifts with newfound confidence, and craftsmen refining their tools with pride. These scenes reassured him that the unity he had built was strong enough to endure even as the realm prepared for greater challenges. One evening, Timur paused at the edge of a river where several clans had gathered to celebrate a successful harvest. The gathering was peaceful, filled with laughter and shared meals. As Timur watched, he realized that this harmony, this quiet, natural cooperation, was the true heart of his dream. It was not about territory or power, but about creating a world where people felt secure, respected, and connected. As he stood beneath the fading light, Timur understood that the next step was no longer a distant vision. The realm was ready to expand its influence, not through force but through the steady presence of a leader who had earned the trust of his people. The world beyond awaited structure, and Timur felt prepared to offer it, one deliberate step at a time. As the final preparations quietly settled into place, Timur stood at the threshold of a new era for his realm. The land he had nurtured from scattered clans into a unified, resilient community was now steady enough to look beyond itself. Every village, every clan, every trade route pulsed with the same calm rhythm, a harmony forged through patience, fairness, and intention. Timur sensed that the moment he had long anticipated had finally arrived. He gathered his commanders and advisors for a final council meeting before stepping into the wider world. The gathering was not dramatic or ceremonial. It was simple, quiet, and purposeful, just as Timur preferred. As they sat together in a wide circle, Timur spoke with the same clarity that had guided them through years of transformation. He reminded them that expansion was not a pursuit of glory. It was a responsibility. Lands beyond their borders were suffering under disorder, waiting for a structure strong enough to guide them. He emphasized that their strength must always serve stability, never ambition alone. His commanders nodded, understanding that they carried not just weapons, but the principles that had shaped their realm: discipline, unity, respect. In the days that followed, Timur travelled once more across his homeland, not to inspect or correct, but to observe. He visited farmers in highland valleys, merchants along busy caravan stops, blacksmiths shaping tools for the coming journeys, and elders who had witnessed the realm's transformation. Everywhere he went, he saw signs of confidence and quiet pride. People greeted him not with fear or excessive reverence, but with trust, the trust that he would lead them true. One evening, he returned to a familiar ridge overlooking the plains. The villages below shimmered in the soft glow of countless small fires. The sight reminded him of his youth, when he had first begun imagining a world shaped by clarity and order. Now, that vision stood before him, not as a dream, but as a living reality. And beyond it stretched a horizon full of lands waiting for guidance. Timur inhaled the cool night air and felt no anxiety, no hesitation, only assurance. The years spent cultivating unity had prepared him for this moment. The realm was strong, his people united, and the world ready for the structure only he could offer. As dawn approached, Timur mounted his horse, the horizon glowing softly before him. He did not announce the beginning of a conquest. He simply began the next step of his journey. Guided by patience, strengthened by unity, and driven by the calm vision that had shaped his entire life, Timur moved forward, ready to extend stability into a world longing for order. The warrior who once dreamed of a perfect empire was now prepared to build it,